Wolf Warrior 2 was one of 2017's most incredible movie stories because it made nearly $1 billion, but hardly anyone outside of China has ever heard of it. After watching it, and it was actually really hard to get a hold of, I think it was a fascinating mix of Chinese ideology with American machismo, and it just sort of tells the story of the assertive China the United States is facing today. Um, so I wanted to make a video about it. Um, but first, let us talk a little bit about how much money this movie made. The official box office is around 800 plus million. But there has been a rash of recent ticket boosting scandals on ticket buying websites in China, including one scandal with the movie Us and Them, a terrible romantic comedy that supposedly made 44 million but ended up having a sizable portion of those tickets refunded a week later. I read a few Reddit threads and comments which expressed skepticism about how much money this movie Wolf Warrior 2 actually made, citing this Us and Them scandal as proof that China's box office numbers, Wolf Warriors especially, are all fabricated. There's no denying that the numbers are going to raise some eyebrows. Wolf Warrior 2 made all of its money in China, did about $2 million in the United States, which is the biggest film market in the world by far. It is a sequel made to a movie released in 2015, and that movie only made a modest 89 million. It beat that number literally sort of right there in the first weekend with 131 million the weekend open, 146 million over the next 4 days, and 570 million after 13 days. The final box office gross was 874 million, which was 50% higher than the next ranked movie on the list. Though that I think it's gonna be dependent on how Wandering Earth does, which I haven't seen yet. Wandering Earth it's not looking like it's gonna beat Wolf Warrior 2's numbers, but we'll see. So how can this be? So I cannot tell you for sure that the box office numbers are fake. I'm not an auditor. But there are reasons to believe that Wolf Warrior 2 is a unique film and that it had been genuinely popular. It beat a Chinese propaganda movie put out and sponsored by the government, The Founding of the Army, which to be honest was a really boring movie, and it was shown on fewer screens than this propaganda movie on its first weekend. It had withstood scrutiny on its numbers even after the 2018 scandal took down several other films. I think the other reason that I personally believe that this movie's box office numbers are real is because I don't really think a movie like this has ever come out of China before. And I'm going to talk more a little about that in the movie's presentation. But let me first talk a bit about the plot. The movie's plot is a Chinese port of the traditional Sylvester Stallone type action flicks of the 1980s. A rugged action star with a good heart and tortured past goes away to a certain place so that he may be able to find peace after traumatic events in his past, which I think it was the events of Wolf Warrior 1, which I never saw. But while he goes on this new adventure away from the rest of the world, he runs across a new situation that requires his help and his particular set of skills. There is a bad guy, there are some people who need protecting, there is a beautiful woman. He beats the bad guys, saves those who need protecting, and kisses the girl. The plot beats are entirely ordinary. The difference is how those plot elements are mixed in with a certain way that reflects the cultures in which the movie was made, as well as asserting itself in a way that that culture isn't particularly well known for. Wolf Warrior 2 feels very much unlike other movies that have come out of the Chinese mainland. China's biggest native grossers up until then include The Mermaid, which is about a mermaid who falls in love, and Monster Hunt, which is a fantasy action comedy. They're attuned to Chinese taste by pulling elements out of Chinese culture. Wolf Warrior 2 attunes to Chinese tastes by pulling from and then tweaking elements out of American hyper-masculine action film culture. If you listen to the soundtrack, you find that the music is Western. There's no erhu here. It has no Eastern feel. It's a powerful orchestral beat with drums, strings, and heavy brass. There are big explosions that are cinematic, big and frequent, and lovingly framed like right out of a Michael Bay film. The inclusion of these Western elements is deliberate. To create it, director and producer Wu Jing, he's also the star, brought in the Russo brothers, known for having made Marvel movies such as Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, as consultants. And I believe they produced it through their company. Their style is reflected on the silver screen. There is very little CGI in the film, with the majority of stunts and explosions done practically. Action scenes are filmed up close to the combatants, and they give a gritty feel which fits into the style of today's big-budget Hollywood films. These scenes are spliced alongside majestic wide-angle shots that move, letting you see the whole set. This adds to the story's epic, sweeping tone. My favorite scene in the movie comes just a few minutes in. My screenwriting teacher back in university always told me that you had to grab the viewer right at the beginning. It's why J.J. Abrams movies usually, or almost usually, sometimes start in the middle. It's a critical part of the Marvel movie formula to start with a big action set piece. Wolf Warrior 2 starts like no action movie in China. The film opens with a drone shot flitting over land with tense music playing in the background. It then passes over the beach and rests on a cargo ship being chased down by pirates. The pirates disable the ship and begin shooting. You can hear the caption shouting for help from the United Nations, but the help is too far away. And this is a cut, a freeze shot from this scene. But then the camera suddenly pans down to see Wu Jing's character running around the corner and preparing to jump overboard. We need no introduction to his character, the music tells you everything. He leaps into the water, and what follows is a stunning hold-your-breath underwater fight scene in which Wu subdues and ties 4 African pirates underwater. The whole 45-second scene from when Wu runs around the corner, leaps some 20 feet into the water, and ties up the bad guys is cleverly cut to look like as if it happened in just one take. My point with this dense description is to make it clear that this is no channel-stuffing romantic comedy. This 30-second scene, a setup scene unrelated to the main plot, and kind of reminds me of those James Bond films, must have taken a whole lot to plan and shoot, but it gets the point across. This is a titanic, slick film that holds up to any $200 million Hollywood action blockbuster. But it is due to this fidelity to Western Hollywood blockbuster norms that I felt so uneasy watching this movie. It is decidedly pro-China. There are many times in which the movie's plot beats bend awkwardly to make certain points that flatter the Chinese government. For example, there is a scene in which Chinese hostages are being chased by an African rebel force. The hostages make their way to the Chinese embassy, whereupon a dozen uniformed PLA soldiers intimidatingly pour out to brandish guns at the attacking rebels. Meanwhile, the ambassador runs shouting, "Don't shoot, we are Chinese. China and Africa are friends." My favorite example of the pro-Chineseness of this movie is in the final scene, where Wu triumphantly returns to the Chinese embassy riding in a truck full of African hostages that he single-handedly saved while holding up the Chinese flag wrapped around his injured arm. And then the following cut shows text that solemnly declares that the Chinese nation will always defend the Chinese people. I found that pretty subtle. I think few Hollywood blockbusters would attempt to display such strong tendencies towards the United States. Films that do seem to be doing it are either doing it tongue-in-cheek or are directed by Michael Bay. And those which try to tend to get a lot of ridicule from an American public jaded by such ham-fisted nationalism. But thinking about all this, I think then you might wonder the question, is Wolf Warrior 2 anti-American? I don't know how to answer that. While the main villain is an American, the movie on the whole does not seem to be outright anti-American. Rather, it seems to exist in a world where the United States is just kind of not around. Instead, whenever the movie wants to refer to foreigners or the international community, they just kind of refer to the United Nations. And the only explicit reference to the United States takes place in the exchange between the main female protagonist, Rachel Smith, and Wu. And in it, she says, "We should go to the American consulate. The US Marines are stationed there. That's our safest bet." And Wu says, "You think the US Marines are the best in the world. That may be true, but where are they now?" And she says, "I've informed the consulate of the situation." And then he says, "Where are they? Tell me exactly how you informed them." And then she says, well, I ruined the punchline, but it says, "I tweeted at him on Twitter." And then he glances at her with a bemused look. And I think it says a lot that I think the intended audience is supposed to laugh at this. So overall, the conclusion is this was definitely not a great movie. It might not even be a good one, but it makes me as an American profoundly uncomfortable. For that reason, I think more Westerners should go see it. Wolf Warrior 2 is going to start a trend. Any movie that makes so much money and breaks so much ground in the Chinese pop culture is going to do that. The second, I guess now third, now The Wandering Earth is doing pretty well, highest grossing Chinese film is Operation Red Sea, which takes after many of the nationalistic, hyper-masculine military tones that Wolf Warrior 2 and really amps it up. There are going to be more movies that take the methods and styles of Western blockbusters but use them to apply Chinese nationalist sentiments. Sort of how the Chinese Communist Party itself adopted capitalism without democracy. The fact that the movie made all of its money in China tells me that local audiences there are ready for this sort of content. Xi Jinping often talks about the China Dream, which is a rejuvenation in which China will retake its place as the center of the world. In this founding national story, China had been the most powerful country in the world until its decline and subsequent 100 years of humiliation at the hands of the colonizing Western powers like France and the United Kingdom. The Communist Party now leads the nation out of this shameful period of time and returns it to its former status as the leading country of the world. But the fact that this movie made virtually no money outside of China tells me something else, that the rest of the world is made a little uncomfortable by this new message. Whether they will accept it in the new future as it gets more and more prevalent is something for which we will have to wait and see.